Tractate Nedarim discusses the laws of vows, referred to as a neder, essentially a verbal declaration, usually to make something forbidden to you, which has legal significance. Chapter 1 will begin the discussion on the laws of taking vows upon yourself. The first Mishnah says, any other equivalent terminology for a vow functions the same as a typical vow. Any other equivalent terminology for a cherem, a type of vow, functions the same as a typical cherem. Any other equivalent terminology for an oath functions the same as a typical oath, and any other equivalent terminology for a Nazirite vow functions the same as a typical Nazirite vow. For instance, if somebody says, I am vowed from you, or I am separated from you, or I am distanced from you in that which I eat of yours, or that which I taste of yours, despite the slightly unique wording in these cases, it still functions as a valid vow. If somebody says, I am detached from you, Rabbi Akiva had a doubt as to if this is a valid vow, but he ruled stringently. The Gemara says, it taught all the different types of vows and oaths, as vows and oaths are taught about together in the Torah, so it also taught about all the other types of vows here too. And I mentioned Charamim first, as that similar to vows is a vow where you prohibit an item to yourself, unlike by an oath where you prohibit yourself to an item. Further, oddly, the Mishnah said it would list equivalent terminologies of vows, but those that it listed aren't equivalent terminologies. Those are brought later. The ones it brought here are partial declarations, so it's explained that it actually meant to say also partial declarations, and it taught those first here, as they were mentioned last by the preface, which is something done in many Mishnahs, and it gives several examples. It also gives some examples of Mishnahs where the first clause of the preface is actually spoken on first, but those are explained to be Mishnahs with many different clauses, so by those it explains the first one first. However, it cites more examples to prove that's not true, so it actually suggests that sometimes it just decides to discuss the first clause first, and sometimes, like by our Mishnah, it decides to discuss the second clause first. Alternatively, it said that when listing the preface, it said the actual biblical concept first, and then in the discussion it discussed the concept of partial declarations first, as those are derived from scriptural exposition. However, others disagree and say that the equivalent terms aren't even of biblical origin at all, so in the end it says, when we said to slot in the preface of partial declarations, it actually meant that we should slot them in first. It also describes the scriptural exposition that sources the laws of partial declarations, which are discussed. This is further described, and it also says a source, which states that somebody who took a Nazirite vow, swearing off wine, grapes, and other things, if he violates his vow, he's done 2 transgressions, for violating his vow and for consuming wine. There's also a prohibition against delaying the fulfillment of a vow, which can apply to a Nazir if he vows to become a Nazir before dying, at which point he's immediately obligated to become a Nazir from that point onward. It cites proofs from related cases. Another instance of one who takes a Nazirite vow violating the principle to not delay, a Nazir cannot become impure, in addition to not drinking wine. So he violates the principle of not delaying if he takes his Nazirite vow while he's inside of a graveyard. Even if you say his vow doesn't take effect immediately, he's delaying it by staying in an impure place. By the way, this also teaches that if an actual Nazir intentionally becomes impure, he transgresses the prohibition against delaying. Another way a Nazir can delay, on top of not becoming impure or drinking wine, a Nazir is required to cut his hair and bring some offerings when the time of his Nazirite vow is over. So he can also delay doing either of those. There's further discussion on this point. In regards to the partial declarations mentioned, if somebody says, I am vowed from you, or separated from you, some say if he adds the ending part of, in that which I eat of yours, he's forbidden to benefit from the other guy, but the other guy can benefit from him. If he just said the first part, neither of them can benefit from each other. This is debated from other sources where such specificity of wording is not recognized. Instead, it suggests that he needs the second part of the statement about food for it to be an effective vow, as these partial declarations are vague, and when he says, I am vowed from you, that could just mean I won't speak to you, or when he says, I am separated from you, that could just mean I won't do business with you, that kind of thing. This would mean this opinion holds that inconclusive partial declarations are invalid in accordance with other opinions, and we bring sources. Whether inconclusive partial declarations are valid is actually debated by others, although some would actually hold that they are effective, besides for by a divorce document, which is debated over. The validity of these points is debated from other sources. It also debates if a partial declaration is valid by a betrothal, or peya, a type of field charity, based on its comparisons to other cases. They're left unresolved. It asks if there's validity to partial declaration by charity, or to nullify your ownership of something, which is debated if it's different than charity, legally, at least. Also, if there's validity to a partial declaration of designating an area as a restroom, and these are also left unresolved. In regards to Rabbi Akiva's doubt regarding the I am detached from you, he ruled stringently on the doubt, so there wouldn't be a punishment of lashes if you violated such a vow. Others debate this point, and it mentions some laws of excommunication. If excommunication is done in somebody's presence, it must be annulled in their presence. If it wasn't done in their presence, it can be annulled with or without his presence. Some say if somebody hears a man say God's name in vain, they must excommunicate that man, and if he doesn't, then he himself should be excommunicated. This is because saying God's name in vain leads to poverty. There are instances of this brought. It also says the sage can excommunicate himself, and he's allowed to annul his own excommunication. There's an instance of this by a sage who would always excommunicate himself before excommunicating somebody else, and then he would nullify both the excommunications. There are other teachings that says you're allowed to swear to perform a mitzvah. It says a person who says he will get up early to study a chapter, or that he will study a tractate, has vowed a great vow. You can fulfill the oath from Mount Sinai to study Torah by saying the Shema prayer every morning and night. It also says if a person tells a person they should arise early and study a chapter, then he must do the same also. Further, if somebody had a dream that he was excommunicated, he must have it annulled before 10 people who at least study Gemara. And if he can't find 10 of such people, he should at least get 10 people who study Mishnah. And if he can't find those, he should wait until he gets 10 who can study Gemara. And in the meanwhile, he should sit at a crossroads and greet people who will respond, "Peace be with you," to keep himself safe. You must still do all of this even if he knows who excommunicated him in the dream, as while that man he dreamed about was an agent to excommunicate him, perhaps that man wasn't an agent to annul his excommunication. If in the dream the excommunication was also annulled, you can't rely on that, as serious dreams do also have some nonsense mixed in. There are examples of such instances occurring. It also says a single expert sage can annul excommunication, and it lists points on the importance of not saying God's name in vain. New Mishnah. Further examples of partial declarations: if somebody says, like the vows of the wicked, meaning like a casual vow, whether to become a Nazir, or to bring an offering, or for an oath, that's an effective vow. If he says, like the vows of the virtuous, it's not a valid vow. If he said, like the Nedava of the virtuous, which is a specific type of vow, this is valid, be it to become a Nazir or to bring an offering. The Gemara says, regarding if he says, like the vows of the wicked, he needs to add am I, as long as there's an actual Nazir there right in front of him. Upon me, to bring an offering, or from it I shall not eat, for an oath, for it to be valid for those vows. There are further points. It gives the difference between a vow, which is said by some to just not be done at all, and an adava, which is a proper thing, either as that's done to vow the consecration for an animal specifically right before it's offered, so that way it won't be misused, or by a Nazirite vow taken with full sincerity, like by an instance where it says a man was extremely handsome, so he took a Nazirite vow to remove his hair so that way he wouldn't come to sin. There are further points on this list, and there's additional discussion on this. New Mishnah: if a person takes a vow to bring an offering, a karban, it's still valid if he says equivalent definitions, like the word konam, konach, or konas instead of the word karban. That's a valid substitute for the word. Similarly, if he says cherek, cherech, or cheref, this is valid instead of the word cherem. If he says nazik, naziach, or paziach, these are valid instead of the Nazirite vow. If he says shavusa, shekuka, or the vow of Mohi, which is a way of saying Moshe, this is valid instead of an oath. The Gemara disputes the sources for all these terminologies, and it discusses the validity of various other specific terminologies. New Mishnah: if somebody vows in reference to a person's food that to him it's not unconsecrated, not kosher, not clean or pure, impure, leftovers of an offering, or rejected food from an offering, he's invalidated himself from eating the food. If he says the food should be like a designated lamb, an animal kept in a temple enclosure, like an animal designated for the temple fire, like on the altar, like from the heichal in the temple, like offerings in Jerusalem, or referencing any of the altar accessories, even if he didn't mention a specific offering, it's considered a vow to designate something as an offering. Others say if he says it should be like in Jerusalem, he hasn't said anything. The Gemara further debates these points as to the authorship of this Mishnah. This is further discussed, along with some additional points. It goes through other terminology which encompasses broader concepts in regards to vows, like the inclusion of teruma from certain phrases and similar, and the other terminologies are also qualified. New Mishnah: saying karban, or any of the specific types of temple offerings, ola, mincha, chatas, toda, or shlomim, and then he says, that which I eat of yours, he can't eat the food, but others say he can, as he needed to say, like a karban specifically. If somebody says the karban, or like a karban, or just karban, and then that that which I eat of yours, he can't eat the person's food. If he said, to a korban, I shall not eat of yours, some say he can't eat of their food. The Gemara further qualifies these points. New Mishnah, if somebody says, konam, my mouth speaking to you, or my hand working with you, or my foot walking with you, that's a valid vow of prohibition. The Gemara says, as vows are only really applicable by things which have substance, he must be vowing against the person's mouth, hands, or feet which have substance, and it brings sources. And that's the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Tractate Nedarim discusses some additional specific terminology in regards to their validity as vows. The first Mishnah says, if somebody vows that somebody's food should be to them unconsecrated, like pork, like an idol, like skin perforated at the heart, like types of improperly slaughtered animals, like types of bugs or crawling creatures, like the challah tithe or teruma, the vower can still eat the food. If somebody vows to his wife that she should be to him like his mother, he must have the vow annulled so that way he takes such things more seriously. The Gemara suggests if he said the food should be like not unconsecrated food, some say this means it should be like a korban, a temple offering, thereby disallowing it. This is debated. Others say that such an implication can't be derived. The general point of the Mishnah is that if somebody associates a permissible item with an inherently forbidden item, that's not a valid vow. It cites sources for these points in regards to somebody vowing his wife should be like his mother. Biblically, he's done nothing, but rabbinically, he must still have the vow annulled. Others say this is only if he's a Torah scholar. He must actually have it annulled if he's ignorant, and it brings sources. This is further discussed. New Mishnah. If somebody says, konam, my sleeping, or speaking, or walking, or cohabiting with his wife, he cannot desecrate this vow. The Gemara says, if somebody vows against sleeping today on condition that he sleeps the following day, it's a debate. Some say he might sleep the next day, so he can't sleep today. Others say that's not a concern, so he can just sleep on the first day. If somebody says he's vowing against sleeping tomorrow, if he sleeps today, that's valid, as the vow is conditional on what he does today. Further, again, as a vow must be on something of substance, the case of the Mishnah must be that his eyes are konam from sleep specifically. This, however, cannot refer to a permanent vow against sleep, as it says if somebody vows against sleeping for 3 days, as that's basically impossible, he immediately receives lashes for swearing in vain, and then he's just allowed to sleep. So, the case must refer to where he vowed that against his eyes sleeping today, if he sleeps tomorrow, meaning that the first part is a possible vow and the second part is a stipulation, as he can't sleep at all on the first day in case he sleeps on the second day. Others say that simply the vow is a rabbinic one, which can't be desecrated, and we bring sources. This is further debated. There's additional discussion on this point. New Mishnah, if somebody vows against sleeping, speaking, or walking, he can't do those things. If somebody says, korban, I shall not eat of yours, ha korban, that which I eat of yours, or la korban, I shall not eat of yours, he's not allowed to eat the other person's food. The Gemara says, this is the opinion of the one who holds that there's a difference between saying korban, that which I eat of yours, which would be valid, and ha korban, that which I eat of yours, which would not be valid. Also here he said la korban as 2 words, which means not to a korban, which is not a valid oath, unlike saying la korban, which means to a korban. New Mishnah, if somebody says, an oath I will not eat of yours, or behold an oath that I eat of yours, or not an oath I shall not eat of yours, he can't eat the other guy's food. The Gemara explains that saying, behold an oath that I eat of yours, meaning he's vowing against eating the man's food, as the specific word used can be in reference to not eating, sometimes depending on the context. Others say it used the wrong word in the Mishnah, and it should have wrote differently that I will not eat, which is about a letter off in its original language, and still would be a valid oath, even if he misspoke. Others say simply the wording must be amended to say that he did not eat, as stated. New Mishnah, oaths can be stronger than vows, and vows can be stronger than oaths. For instance, if somebody vowed against doing a mitzvah, against making a sukkah, shaking a lulav, putting on tefillin or similar, that's a valid vow, but he can't take an oath against doing a mitzvah. The Gemara explains that the way oaths are stricter than vows is by the earlier case. If somebody vows against sleeping, speaking, or walking, that vow goes into effect rabbinically, but if it was an oath, it would go into effect biblically. It also brings sources for these points, which are discussed. New Mishnah, there is validity to a vow within a vow, but not to an oath within an oath. For instance, if somebody vows to become a Nazir, if he eats bread and says that vow twice and eats it, he must now become a Nazir for 2 terms. But if he takes an oath not to eat bread and then he repeats that and then eats the bread, he's only liable once. The Gemara clarifies the double Nazirite vow only works twice if he vowed for 2 different periods. If he vowed that both Nazirite vows should be within the same time period, he'd still only do one. Others disagree and say that he must do a second term after the first, and these opinions are debated from various sources, and there's additional discussion on them. New Mishnah, indeterminate vows are treated stringently, but if they're clarified afterwards, they're believed, even if it's lenient. For instance, if somebody declares an object to be to him like salted meat or a wine libation, if he specified he meant like a temple temple offering, it would be forbidden to him. But if he specified it should be like an idolatrous offering, he'd be allowed to eat it, and if he didn't specify, he can't eat it. There are a few other examples given. Some say if he vows that his food should be like teruma in Judea, it's forbidden. In Galilee, it would be permitted, as the forbidden type of truma would be a half shekel tax, which the people in Galilee just weren't very familiar with. Others make a similar distinction by cherem, items vowed to be temple property. In Judea, they'd be permitted, and in Galilee, they would be forbidden, as they don't know about the cherem of Kohanim, which can be used. The Gemara disputes based off of similar cases if you can actually rule stringently by an indeterminate vow, as a different source says a Nazirite vow, if indeterminate, is treated leniently. It's debated further as to which differing opinions were the authors of these statements, and the other points are also qualified. New Mishnah. In regard to somebody who makes a vague vow and then clarifies it to be lenient, there are a few examples. If he vowed an item to be cherem and then said he was referring to fishing nets, if he vowed regarding an offering and then said he meant an offering for kings, if he vowed against his wife benefiting from him, and then clarified he meant an earlier divorced wife, and others. With all these vows, they don't need to go before a sage to have them annulled. If they did, then it must be held strictly. Others say we find a basis to annul a vow and tell them to keep it, so that way they'll take vows seriously. The Gemara clarifies it means a Torah scholar doesn't need to have his vow annulled, but an ignorant person is treated strictly. Such a person is punished that he must keep the vow for the same number of days that he violated it before it's annulled. Others say a court just shouldn't get involved if the person transgresses such a vow. Others say we excommunicate a court that doesn't impose this penalty. It also similarly cites points on generally refraining from vows to prevent these issues and other things that lead to sin, like staring at women and similar. It also speaks on the importance of being modest while being intimate and similar points. Further on this, there's a dispute if there are particularities as to the manner of cohabitation. It cites verses which source the fact that a man should never think of another woman during cohabitation, and similar improper actions or people that will result in the individual's children ending up improper. And that's the end of chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Tractate Nedarim continues going through the laws of vows. The first Mishnah says there are 4 types of vows which are permitted by the sages, which just means that these following types of vows are null. Motivational vows, exaggerated vows, unwitting vows, and vows of circumstances beyond your control. A motivational vow, for instance, is a vow taken during a business deal that you won't go higher than a certain amount, even though you would be willing to. The Gemara disputes the author of this Mishnah based on a related case. There's further debate as to what exactly this means that the sages allowed these vows. Some suggest it means a sage must annul them. Others say it means that they're automatically null. Others say it means that a sage can only nullify vows similar to these, meaning regret is not a valid method of nullifying the vow. There are instances of this brought. It further gives cases of instances of invalidating vows, and it also speaks on how negative it is to be an angry person, how there's severe punishment for such, and it also mentions an incident where a sage was traveling with others and one of them got angry and killed the other, and then the person turned to the sage and asked if he had done the right thing, and the sage, fearing for his life, said yes, and you should open the wound up so that way the man will die faster and not suffer. Later the sage was upset by this whole event, but he was told he had done the right thing in saving his own life. It further speaks on how terrible it is to get angry. There are further particular instances of annulment of vows, and it's ruled that we do find a way to annul a vow out of the man's regret of the vow, and we do also deal with one who vows on God's name. There are further similar instances discussed, and these are all described further. New Mishnah, if somebody wants to vow to make his friend eat with him, he should earlier say that any vow he makes should be null, and this works as long as he remembers he did this when he makes the vow. The Gemara asks how this would work if the other guy knows he's preemptively nullified this vow that he's gonna make. Some say to amend the wording to be that this works if he doesn't remember the nullification when he made the vow. Others say it's where he made the nullification stipulation earlier, but he forgot what he had said, so he says he's making his vow in accordance with his original intent to nullify it. It's debated if this type of vow constitutes as the above-mentioned type of motivational vow, which is debated from several sources. It's said that others do disagree, but it's held that this case does constitute a motivational vow. New Mishnah, the next mentioned type of vow was an exaggerated vow. For instance, if somebody vows not to eat something if he didn't see as many people on a road as there were people by the exodus from Egypt, or that he saw a snake as thick as the beam from an olive press. The Gemara says exaggerated vows are permissible, but not exaggerated oaths. For instance, taking an oath against all the fruit of the world as he didn't see an amount of people as great as the Exodus. It also clarifies he can't say when he took this oath that he was referencing an anthill, actually, as that's not the way people typically speak. Judges still do clarify the literal meaning of an oath, but that's only because there was a famous case where a man owed coins to somebody and told him that he had already paid it, so it was brought to court, and the judge told the borrower to swear that he had given the man the coins back. So the borrower handed the other guy his cane, and he took this oath that he had returned the coins, and the other guy got so mad he smashed the cane, and all the coins rolled out. So that meant technically the guy had not made a false oath, as he had literally returned the coins. It further clarifies the necessity for specific wording in an oath, and it says that he can't be referring to other concepts when he uses particular words. In regards to exaggerating that you saw a massive snake, but it says there actually was such a massive snake in the days of King Shapur, which swallowed 13 stablesfuls of hay. So rather, when somebody is exaggerating a vow that a snake was like an olive press, it means that the snake's back is rigid. This also informs us that the back of an olive press is rigid, which has relevancy in regards to whether or not it needs this factor in regards to the laws of sale. New Mishnah. An unwitting vow, as mentioned, is if somebody vowed against something if he had eaten or drunk earlier in that day, and then he remembered that he had actually eaten or drank earlier that day. Or if it's somebody who vows against something if he will eat or drink, and then he forgets about this vow, and then he ends up eating or drinking. There are other instances given. The Gemara says, along with an unwitting vow being allowed, an unwitting oath is also permitted. For instance, if two people take an oath that somebody said something, and they both believe themselves to be correct. It discusses the above cases, and these are all qualified further, along with some additional points. New Mishnah. A vow of circumstance beyond their control is a vow, for instance, against somebody that they must eat with him, and then the other person becomes sick or otherwise unavoidably delayed. The vow does not take effect. The Gemara cites a relevant case of such a thing occurring. Some ruled in that case the person's vow was null. Others disagree, as they say it was by a foreseeable constraint. The other says it was null, as the case was what's referred to as an asmachta, which means a commitment that the person made not thinking he'd have to honor, which this opinion holds is not legally binding. The law is that such a commitment, in asmachta, is legally binding, so long as he wasn't constrained by circumstances beyond his control, and it was made through a formal act of acquisition through a prestigious court. New Mishnah. You are legally allowed to vow to a murderer, a plunderer, or an unlawful tax collector that the produce that they're trying to steal from you is teruma, or it belongs to royalty, even though that's not true, just so that way they won't eat it. Beis Shammai says you can make any type of vow for this, but not an oath. Beis Hillel says you can also make an oath. Beis Shammai says you can't initiate such a vow. Beis Hillel says you can. Beis Shammai says the vow is only allowed on the demanded parts of the vow. Beis Hillel says it's on any part of the vow, he said. Examples are given. The Gemara clarifies when it says the tax collector, obviously as there's an obligation to abide by the laws of the country you live in, you have to pay your taxes. So clearly this must refer to an unlawful tax collector, either one who made no set limit or a self-appointed tax collector. It further describes the method of making such vows. There's an apparent dissenting source which implies that an oath can be made according to Beis Shammai, but this is disputed. New Mishnah. If somebody vows that saplings should be consecrated if they're not felled, or a talus should be consecrated if it's not burnt, they will be considered consecrated and must be redeemed. If somebody vowed that saplings should be consecrated until they're felled, or a talus should be consecrated until it's burned, they are consecrated but not redeemed. The Gemara says, it said they're also redeemed by the first one to parallel the wording of the latter part. It further describes the method of such a consecration vow. The reason the consecrated produce can't be redeemed is because they'd automatically just be reconsecrated over and over until they're felled or burned. Others say it's because once they're felled, they don't need to be redeemed, they're just automatically deconsecrated. This is for the debated. It brings other cases to dispute the opinion that physical sanctity can't leave by itself, and there's further discussion on these points by relevant cases, which are qualified further. New Mishnah. If somebody vows against benefiting from seafarers, he can benefit from land dwellers. If he vowed against benefiting from land dwellers, he can't even benefit from seafarers, as they're also land dwellers. This doesn't apply by travelers of a short distance, but rather to a large distance. This last point, it's debated if it refers to the first or last part. Some say the first part, someone who vows against benefiting from seafarers can benefit from seafarers of a short distance, but not of a long one, while others say it's on the last part, someone who vows against benefiting from land dwellers still can't benefit from any types of sea dwellers. New Mishnah, somebody who vows against benefiting from those who can see the sun can't benefit from the blind, as he meant those that the sun sees. The Gemara says, if he wanted to not benefit from the non-blind, he would have said against the sighted. This vow he made, vows against those the sun sees, excludes specifically fish or fetuses. New Mishnah, if somebody vows against benefiting from dark-headed people, he still can't benefit from bald or old people, but he can benefit from women or children, as dark-headed is an expression to refer to men specifically. The Gemara says, he didn't say not to benefit from those without hair. Dark-headed refers to men, as women always cover their hair, hair, and children always uncover their hair. New Mishnah, if somebody vows against benefiting from the Yoladim, those who were born, he can benefit from those who will be born. If he vowed against benefiting from Noladim, those who will be born, he can't benefit even from those who are already born, but others disagree, and others say he's referring to anything that can be born. The Gemara clarifies the logic of these terminologies. The last opinion includes only mammals. New Mishnah, one who vowed against benefiting from those who rest on Shabbos can't benefit from Jewish people or Kuthians. If he vowed against benefiting from people who eat garlic, this includes Jewish people and Kuthians. If he vowed against those who go up to Jerusalem, that includes only Jewish people. The Gemara explains, he said those who rest on Shabbos, which Kuthians also did. He should have said those who are commanded to keep Shabbos. By going up to Jerusalem, Jewish people and Kuthians were commanded to do this, but only the Jewish people did this. New Mishnah, if somebody vowed against benefiting from the descendants of Noah, he cannot benefit only from non-Jewish people. The Gemara explains that although everybody's included as a descendant of Noah, Jewish people aren't referred to as such. They're called descendants of Abraham. New Mishnah, if somebody vows to not benefit from the descendants of Abraham, he can't benefit only from Jewish people. The Gemara explains based on verses that this excludes Yishmael and Esav, even though they are technically also his descendants. New Mishnah, if somebody vows against benefiting from Israel, he can do business with them at a loss. If he vows that Israel can't benefit from him, he can do business with them at a gain, although people probably won't do business with him. If somebody vows against the benefit to or from Israel, he can do business with idol worshippers. The Gemara cites some related points, and these are discussed further. If somebody vows against benefiting from the uncircumcised, he can still even benefit from uncircumcised Jewish people, and not from circumcised non-Jewish people. If he vowed to not benefit from the circumcised, this still includes circumcised Jewish people and excludes circumcised non-Jewish people based on verses. It lists several teachings from several sages on the great importance of circumcision. The Gemara describes how Moshe was punished for delaying the circumcision of his son as he traveled back to Egypt, even a little bit. It says, as he traveled, 2 angels of destruction came and swallowed Moshe up to the legs, so Moshe's wife quickly performed the circumcision. It cites several other teachings on the great importance of circumcision, that it's equivalent to all of the other commandments of the Torah and similar. It also criticizes people who try to divine the future, and says God will help those who don't do such things, which is based on verses. There are further points on the forefather Abraham. It says he recognized God when he was 3 years old. It also says he had total mastery of his body, which again is all based on verses, and the priesthood was taken from the descendants of Shem to be with Abraham's descendants. And that's the end of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Tractate Nedarim continues discussing the laws of vows. The first mission says, there is no legal difference between somebody who vows against benefiting from another person and somebody who vows against letting his food be used to benefit somebody, besides for entering the other person's property or using utensils which aren't used for food, both of which would be disallowed by the first vow. If somebody is subject to a vow that forbids him from receiving food from somebody, he can't use that man's flour sieve, grain sieve, mill, or oven, but he can use the man's shirt, ring, cloak, or earring. The Gemara cites an opinion that holds that forbidding somebody to benefit from you includes your property also. Further, by the vow against receiving food, it also includes all those listed utensils, as the vow in this case was a benefit that brings to the consumption of your food is forbidden to me. It lists several other utensils that would be included in such a vow: a fruit sack, a donkey used to carry fruit, and a basket. It debates about other particular entities if they're included in such a vow. New Mishnah, continuing the last vow, any utensil which is not used to prepare food, if the region rents out similar of such items, it's prohibited. The Gemara says, based on this, the prior Mishnah would disallow the usage of utensils used to prepare food, even if they're not rented, and it says the source for this opinion. New Mishnah, if somebody vows against generally benefiting from somebody, that other person can still pay the individual's half shekel tax for him, repay his debt for him, and return his lost article to him. If the custom in the location is for the finder of the lost object to take compensation, then that, in this case, should be given to the temple treasury. The Gemara explains the logic, as it's similar to driving a lion off of somebody's property, meaning it's preventing a loss, essentially, and it cites the sages who hold this. Some say that alternatively, it's like everybody, and it's a case where the debt in question doesn't have a set repayment date, and it further cites these opinions, which are debated. Regarding the lost object, some would argue if the case of benefiting from the property of the guy with the lost object is forbidden, the finder would not be allowed to return the object, as there's a principle that if you're taking care of somebody's lost object, that's a mitzvah, and you're exempt from any other mitzvah while you do it. So that's technically speaking a form of benefit. Others disagree and say that's just uncommon, and this is further debated. There are related points on similar cases. It additionally discusses some laws of me'ilah, impermissibly benefiting from consecrated property, and similar. New Mishnah, the person who is prohibited to give benefit to another due to a vow he can still separate the other person's terumah or tithes without the other person knowing, or bring burnt offerings for various impurities on his behalf, or sin offerings, or others, and he can teach the man midrash, halacha, law, and agados, but not scripture, although he can teach the man sons and daughters scripture. The Gemara asks a relevant general question, which is, do the Kohanim in the temple act as agents of the public, or as agents for heaven? This is practically relevant if somebody vowed against benefiting from a certain Kohen. This is debated from several sources. It's discussed further. It asks a related point from above. If a person removes tithes from his own produce to cover it for somebody else, does he need that man's consent? It tries to resolve that based on our case, where the terumah removal from the other guy's pile is permissible, even though he couldn't give benefit to the guy. But it's explained that the Mishnah's case was where the man said, whoever wants to remove terumah from my produce should do so, which means that when the other man removed his terumah, it's not regarded as a prohibited benefit. So it asks, if a person separated terumah from his own produce to fix the produce of somebody else, who gets to decide which Kohen receives the terumah? It's debated further, and it says that the decision goes to the separator here. The reason why teaching midrash and similar was permissible, but not scripture, some say it was because it's a place where it was only customary to be paid for teaching scripture. Others disagree and say that teachers aren't paid for the teaching of scripture either. They're paid, according to some, for safeguarding the students, and others say it's for teaching the cantillation, the singing method, essentially, of the verses. According to the opinion that the payment of teaching is for safeguarding the students, our case must be where he's teaching a child, and the part of the Mishnah that says he could teach his children refers to a separate point in general on an adult. But there's a further question. It cites a different case where there's a prohibition against school children from learning new material on Shabbos. So if this teacher's job is safeguarding the students, then he wouldn't be permitted to do so no matter what's being taught, which actually has issues with both opinions. Whether the issue with teaching children new material on Shabbos is either because we want fathers to spend time with their children, or it's because they eat and drink more on Shabbos and they won't be able to study properly. The opinion that says the payment of students is for teaching cantillation, they disagree that it's done for safeguarding, as daughters don't need safeguarding. The one that says it's for safeguarding and not cantillation, that's because he holds cantillation is of biblical origin, so you can't be paid to teach this, and it brings a source for this. Further, it mentions that the vowelization of words, stylistic words, and words which are read but aren't written, or vice versa, are traditions from Mount Sinai, and it gives several examples of these. It further discusses examples of these verses. It mentions Moshe's great wealth, and it says that the divine spirit only rests on one who is mighty, wealthy, wise, and humble, which were all exemplified by Moshe, and it cites sources for each of these, and sources for the wealth of several other prophets. New Mishnah, further in regards to a vow against benefiting somebody, he can still support his wife and kids, even though they're the other guy's responsibility, although he can't feed any of his animals, as that makes them go up in value. Some say he can only feed his non-kosher animals. Further, this opinion says a kosher animal's spirit belongs to heaven, while its body belongs to its owner, while a non-kosher animal's spirit and body are God's. Others disagree, saying a non-kosher animal's spirit also belongs to heaven, and its body also belongs to its owner, as while he can't eat it, he can sell it to a non-Jewish person, for instance, or feed it to his animals. The Gemara says an opinion that if somebody vows against benefiting from somebody, that man can still marry his daughter to him. This case is explained to be where the property of the bride's father is prohibited to the groom, but the daughter is a legal adult, meaning she marries with her own consent. It describes other permissible, smaller benefits that are permitted. New Mishnah, if somebody has been vowed against benefiting from somebody and then goes to visit the man, he can stand but not sit, and can heal his soul but not his money, which will be explained. The Gemara explains this case is where the possessions of the visitor are prohibited to the sick man, and the locale is where they take payment for sitting with a sick man, but not for standing. The generalization of the Mishnah teaches that you are never allowed to take payment for standing with the sick, and therefore cannot derive benefit from doing such a thing. Others say the issue of him sitting is that sitting is forbidden rabbinically in case he sits for too long. Others say the case is the inverse, where the possessions of the sick man are forbidden to the visitor, and the vow didn't include doing things for the man's health within his vow, which can only be done while standing. This is discussed. It digresses to cite many verses and points on the immense importance of visiting the sick, and also verses regarding Korach, who challenged Moshe's leadership during the Jewish people's wandering the desert, during which it says that the sun and moon ascended to the higher heavens and demanded God support Moshe on this, so God responded by asking why they're getting involved in Moshe's honor when every day people worship the sun and moon instead of God. So the sun and moon thought to stop illuminating the world because of this, but God forces them to continue. It further brings points on the great importance of visiting the sick, which has no limit, and it says says it takes away 1/60 of the sick man's suffering to an extent. There are more such points in this, and instances where certain sages became sick, and people visited them, causing them to get better. It says those who visit the sick are spared from Gehenna, and will also be rewarded in this world, and further such points. These are discussed. There are further points on the sick. It says once a person has reached the end of his life, any creature can end him, and it gives examples and it describes other illnesses and their causes. These are discussed, and it says that healing the soul, as mentioned, is healing the man's body, and healing his money means healing his livestock. New Mishnah. The person subject to the vow against benefit is allowed to bathe in a large pool with the man, but not a small one, and they can share a bed. Others say they can't share a bed in the winter, as he benefits from his warmth. He may recline with him on a bed, eat with him at the same table, but not from the same bowl, unless there's enough for both to have leftovers. The Gemara cites sources which say similar points. New Mishnah. A person who was vowed against benefiting from somebody should not eat with the vower from the same food trough for laborers, and not work with him in the same row of a vineyard. Others say they can work in the same row as long as they're far apart. The Gemara says that actually both agree that a close spot is disallowed, and they dispute a far spot. The first opinion is saying they can't work even far apart, as the vower makes the ground softer for the other, while the others say that's just not an issue. New mention, if somebody vowed against benefiting from another person, he can't enter the man's field or eat fruit from branches that extend out of his field. If the vow was made on a sabbatical year when farming is prohibited, he can't enter the man's field, but he can eat of the extending trees. If the vow was against specifically food-related benefit, he can enter the field by both cases and to not eat the fruit accordingly, depending if it was a sabbatical year. The Gemara cites related opinions in these cases. It explains the issue with entering the field on a sabbatical year. It's because you might delay there, which isn't allowed. New Mishnah, somebody who vowed against benefiting from another person, he can't be lent items, can't borrow items, can't lend or borrow money, and can't sell to him or buy from him. The Gemara says the issue of benefiting while borrowing from somebody is either the cases where both men vowed against benefiting from each other, or it's because there's a concern that borrowing will lead to lending, so it's a rabbinic decree. New Mishnah, if somebody asked a man to lend him his cow, and he said it's not available, so the other man vowed against ever plowing his fields with the cow, and then later the man lent him the cow. If it was the vower's habit to plow his field himself, then only he can't use the cow to plow. If his habit was for others to plow his field, then he and everybody can't use the cow to plow the field. If somebody vowed against benefiting from somebody, and he has no food, the other man can go to the store and tell the shopkeeper that he wants to help this guy out, but the guy took a vow against me from benefiting from him, hinting to the shopkeeper to help the guy. So the shopkeeper can help the vower, and then the other guy can pay the shopkeeper. This applies in various cases. If there was no shopkeeper, if they were traveling together, the man can give the food as a gift to somebody else to then give to the vower. If it's just the two of them, he can leave the food on a rock and declare it ownerless, and the vower can eat it. Others forbid this. The Gemara says the opinion that forbids the last one is because he holds making something ownerless is like making it a gift, so he still technically partially owns it. This is debated. It further discusses points on the effectiveness of making an item ownerless. This is discussed further, and there's additional points on these laws. And that's the end of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Tractate Nedarim continues discussing the laws of vows. If two partners who share ownership of a courtyard both took vows against benefiting from each other, both of them are not allowed to enter the courtyard. Others say they can both enter into their own portion of the courtyard. Both of the partners are forbidden to install a mill or oven or to raise chickens in the courtyard. If only one of the partners vowed against benefiting from the other, he can't enter the courtyard. Others say he can enter only in his portion, and we compel the man who took this vow to sell his courtyard share. If some other third guy took a vow against benefiting from one of the courtyard owners, he's not allowed to enter the courtyard. Others say he's allowed to only enter the other's courtyard portion. If somebody took a vow against benefiting from somebody, and that man has a bathhouse or olive press in the city that's leased to others, if he still has a holding on the bathhouse or olive press, the vower can't use it. If he doesn't have a holding on it, the vower can use it. If a man vowed against entering a man's house or purchasing a man's field, and the owner dies or sells it to another, the vower can now enter the house or purchase the field. If he vowed against entering this house or buying this field, even if the owner dies or sells it, he can't enter or purchase them. The Gemara says the Mishnah's first case of the dual vows on the shared courtyard, the cases where the partners vowed against themselves using the other's portion. But what if they vowed against the other partner using their portion? Would that create variance in the opinions? It's debated and it's unresolved. Further, some argue that the disputed case as to whether or not they are banned from using the courtyard or they can just use their portions is if the courtyard is large enough to be divided. If it's too small for that, both would permit using it. This is disputed, as we see from a related case by a synagogue, which is jointly owned by a town. It cannot be entered due to a vow from benefit, even though it's not divisible. So rather, it said the argument between the opinions is where the courtyard is too small to be divided. Both would agree it's forbidden to enter if it's large enough to be split. It says we follow the opinion that allows each to enter their courtyard portion. In regards to the case of a vow against benefiting from someone who owns a bathhouse where he can't use it if the owner still has a holding over it, a holding, according to some, is the owner still retaining the right to at least a quarter of the income. Others define it as the owner having a fixed annual rental fee. A related case, if somebody vows against somebody else entering his house and he then dies or sells the house, it's learned from a different case that someone is allowed to prohibit something of his to somebody and have that continue to apply even after it leaves his possession. There are similar cases discussed, and they're qualified further. New Mishnah. If somebody said, I am chayrim to you, chayrim being property vowed to the temple treasury, he's essentially vowing that the other guy can't benefit from him. If somebody vowed, you are chayrim to me, the vower can no longer benefit from that man. If somebody said, I am chayrim to you, and you are chayrim to me, they cannot benefit from each other. Both of such people can benefit from a public use faculty in Israel for those who came from Babylon, places such as the Temple Mount, the courtyards, and the pilgrimage festival path water cisterns. They can't benefit from a faculty in the town they live in, like the town square, the bathhouse, the town synagogue, and its ark and books. If they want to allow the other to use these faculties, they can give up their share of the faculty by writing it over to the Nasi, the leader of the Jewish people of that time. Some say you can write it to the Nasi or to anyone else, but if you write it to the Nasi, nobody needs to acquire it on your behalf. Well, this would be necessary if it was written to anybody else. Others say even the Nasi needs to have some acquire it on his behalf, and it just mentioned the Nasi here as that's what was typically done. Some rule that the people of Galilee don't need to write over the shares of communal faculties to the Nasi, as this was already done by the earlier generations. The Gemara further describes the process in regards to the people of Galilee. It said that they kept on making vows against benefiting from each other, so they had their shares of the communal properties written over to the Nasi. New Mishnah. If somebody vowed against benefiting from somebody and he has no food, the other man can give his food to somebody else as a gift and have that man give it to the vower. It says an incident of this where a father vowed against benefiting his son, so the son wanted his father to attend his child's wedding feast, so he gave it as a gift to somebody else so that his father could attend, and that man that he had gifted the feast to just decided to consecrate the whole thing to the temple, which the son was not okay with, and it was ruled that it wasn't a valid gift anyways. The Gemara further qualifies these points. There are related incidents brought and discussed, and further in regards to the validity of the wedding gift, consecration case, and similar, and that's the end of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of Tractate Nedarim discusses further laws of vows, further on specific terminology that can be used in a vow. The first Mishnah says, someone who takes a vow against partaking in that which is cooked, he's still allowed to eat or benefit from roasted or undercooked food. If somebody vows against tasting a cooked food, he can't eat liquidy food from a pot, but he can eat solid foods and also a specific type of egg or gourd, which will be described. If somebody vows against a preparation of a pot, he can't eat food that's been boiled extensively. If somebody vows against tasting any food that goes into a pot, he can't eat any foods that are cooked in a pot. The Gemara says, some say if somebody vows against cooked foods, that actually does include roasted food, which was based on the unique wording of their locale. And also, secondarily, from a verse, which seems to imply that roasted foods are referred to as cooked. In regards to the vow against tasting cooked foods, where it said that it forbids liquidy foods, that's because the specific use of terminology refers to foods which are eaten with bread, and sources are provided. It also discusses which types or parts of a squash are good for a sick person. It also says the Mishnah goes against the practice of the Babylonians who eat thick porridge with bread, as that's excluded. It discusses additional points on the proper manner of eating porridge. It also mentions one sage whose face shone, and it's attributed either to his great wisdom or to his personal healthy practices. It also discusses the beginnings of the great sage Rabbi Akiva, who started as an illiterate shepherd, and his employer's daughter, Rachel, saw that he was a good man with great potential and offered to marry him so long as he would study Torah. Rachel's father was very upset by this and disowned her, but they married anyways, and they were extremely poor. It says they would sleep in a straw shed, and Akiva would pick straw out of his wife's hair, and say if he had the means he would give her a golden tiara instead. Eliyahu the prophet appeared as a poor man begging for a little straw, and Akiva told his wife, see, at least we even have straw. Anyways, Akiva eventually went to study at the academy and did so for 12 years. He then returned and overheard a wicked man criticizing his wife, saying, firstly, your station was far higher than your husband, and secondly, he's abandoned you for the past 12 years. Rachel responded to the man, if Akiva was here, she would tell him to go and study for an additional 12 years. So Rabbi Akiva turned and went back to study for another 12 years, and then returned as a great sage with 24,000 pairs of students. Everybody in the town went out to greet him, including his wife, who still wore her poor clothes, so Rabbi Akiva's students, who didn't know who she was, pushed her away, but Rabbi Akiva said to stop, as his Torah and all of theirs belonged to her. Anyways, Rachel's father, who had disowned her a while earlier, heard a great sage had come to town and came to him to release himself from the vow he had made against providing for his daughter. Rabbi Akiva revealed who he was and received great wealth from his father-in-law. It also says Rabbi Akiva became very wealthy as the figurehead of a ship broke off and was found by Rabbi Akiva, and also that he received a treasure chest as he gave a few coins to some sailors to give him anything, and they had found a chest which happened to have been filled with gold coins from a sunken trader ship. He also received a lot of wealth from a Roman noblewoman, from the wife of the Roman governor Turnus Rufus, who would eventually execute Rabbi Akiva, and also from a man named Kitia Bar Shalom, another Roman nobleman who was kind to the Jewish people. A different sage also gave some sailors some coins in exchange for anything, so they gave him a monkey, which ran away into a hole, leading him to find a cache of pearls. It also says a story that the daughter of one of the Caesars was chatting with the sage Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah, and she said that he had such beautiful Torah knowledge, but he was extremely physically unattractive. So he responded by asking where her father kept their best wines, and she said in earthenware vessels. So the sage said they should be kept in fancy gold and silver vessels instead. So she did that, swapping them all into gold and silver vessels, and all the wine went bad. So the sage explained it's the same way with learning Torah. She asked, but there are also extremely handsome Torah scholars, and he said they'd be even more learned if they weren't. It also speaks of a time that there was a different woman who insulted the teacher of a sage during a court case, so the sage excommunicated her and she died. It also describes the special mentioned egg, which was a specially prepared egg that was used for medical diagnostics. There are other further points spoken on. It also describes the preparation of the special gourd dish mentioned. New Mishnah, somebody vowed against the preserved food. He can only not eat preserved vegetables. If he vowed against tasting preserved food, he can't eat any preserved food. The Gemara says it's unresolved what he's banned from if he vows against that which is preserved, that which is undercooked, that which is roasted, etc. A new Mishnah, if somebody vows against the roast, he can't eat roast meat. If he vowed against tasting roast, he can't eat any roast food. If somebody vows against the salted food, he can't eat salted fish. If somebody vowed against tasting salted food, he can't eat any salted food. If somebody vows against eating fish or fishes, he can't eat any fish, be they large or small, salted or unsalted, or raw or cooked, but he can eat a specific type of chopped fish and brine. If somebody vows against eating a specific type of mixture of small salted fish, he can't eat chopped fish, but he can eat brine. If somebody vows against eating chopped fish, he can still eat brine. The Gemara describes which words refer to which types of fish. New Mishnah, if somebody vows against milk, it's debated if they can have whey. If somebody vows against whey, he can have milk. If somebody vows against cheese, he cannot eat any type of cheese, salted or unsalted. If somebody vows against eating meat, it's debated if he can eat gravy or meat shreds. There was a ruling which implies not, but the case was possibly by a specific vow against a specific piece of meat, wherein he couldn't eat the meat or anything its flavor mixed with. If somebody vows against having wine, he can eat a cooked dish that tastes of wine. If somebody vows against tasting wine, he can't eat a dish with wine where the wine can be tasted. The Gemara explains the dispute if you can eat whey, if somebody vowed against milk, is that in some locations they refer to whey as whey of milk. New Mishnah, somebody who vows against grapes can have wine. Somebody who vows against olives can have oil. Somebody who vows against tasting grapes or olives cannot have wine or oil. The Gemara further debates these points. New Mishnah, somebody who vowed against dates can have date honey. Somebody who vowed against winter grapes can have winter grape vinegar. There's a debate on if generally somebody vows against a food, if a derivative of that food is still permissible, if it shares the same name as the food. The Gemara explains that it needs to clarify date honey and vinegar to say what we hold by edible foods, where their derivative is edible and where it's not edible. New Mishnah, somebody who vows against wine can have apple wine. Somebody who vows against oil can have sesame oil. Somebody who vows against honey can have date honey. Somebody who vows against vinegar can have vinegar of winter grapes. Somebody who vows against leeks can have a leek with a head. Somebody who vows against greens can have wild greens. This is all because it goes in accordance with the specific used terms. The Gemara says, the point on oil applies in Israel. In Babylon, if somebody vows against oil, they also can't have sesame oil, but they can have olive oil. If both oils are used, he can't eat either as a stringency. By eating greens, it's similarly reversed that you can only eat the wild greens during a sabbatical year when farming is forbidden. This applies only if greens are not brought from out of Israel inside. Some don't allow doing that at all, out of concern that dirt will be stuck on the produce and violate some laws of impurity. New Mishnah, if somebody vowed against eating cabbage, he can't eat asparagus, a specific type of cabbage, and vice versa. If somebody vows against grits, it's debated if he can have pottage. If somebody vows against pottage, he can't have grits. If somebody vows against pottage, there's debate if he can have garlic. If someone vows against garlic, he can have pottage. If somebody vows against lentils, it's debated if he can have honey-fried lentils. If somebody vowed against having honey-fried lentils, he can have regular lentils. If somebody vowed against tasting wheat grain or grains, he can't have them in flour or bread. If somebody vowed against tasting grit or grits, he can't eat them raw or cooked. Some say if somebody vowed against tasting grit or wheat grain, he can still chew them raw. The Gemara further qualifies these rulings, and that's the end of chapter 6. Chapter 7 of Tractate Nedarim continues discussing the laws of vows in regards to particular vows against types of food. The first Mishnah says, if somebody vows to abstain from eating grains, he's allowed to still eat gourds, but Rabbi Akiva says he can't. It's disputed based on if when people say they're purchasing grains, whether that includes gourds or not. If the person vowed against partaking in fresh Egyptian beans, he's still allowed to eat dried ones. The Gemara says the vow against greens, which potentially included gourds, is as the vow was against greens that are cooked in a pot. The argument, if that includes gourds, is based on whether they hold if a man sends an agent to get vegetables, if the agent consults with the sender, if this includes gourds, whether or not this implies that gourds are included in this category or not. Rabbi Akiva does concede that if he eats gourds in this situation, he wouldn't receive lashes. It cites related cases. It further discusses particular food terminologies which encompass other similar types of foods. New Mishnah, somebody vows to abstain from piled grain, he also can't have dried Egyptian grain, which are piled in a similar manner. Others say he's only prohibited from the 5 species of grain. Others say one who vows to abstain from Tavua, which refers to the 5 grains, abstains only from the 5 grains. If somebody vows to abstain from the piled grain, he can't have anything that's similarly piled in a granary, but he can have fruit trees or grains. The Gemara argues if the term which refers to piled grain includes everything piled in a granary, and what the term tivua encompasses in regards to the 5 grains, which is a different term than tivua of the field. It brings relevant incidents. It also mentions the connotation of other similar terminology. New Mishnah, somebody vows to abstain from clothing. He can still wear sackcloth, a sheet, or a chamila, which is a type of coarse material. If somebody vowed against wearing wool, he can cover himself with wool shearings. If somebody vowed against wearing flax, he can still cover himself with stalks of flax. Others say it's dependent on the vower. For instance, if someone's carrying heavy stuff and he starts sweating and vows against wool and flax, he's allowed to wear them still. He's not allowed to carry such loads on his back. The Gemara lists many types of unique clothing included in a vow against wearing clothing. It discusses related points. New Mishnah, if somebody vows against entering a particular house, it's debated if he can still enter the upper story. If somebody vows against entering the upper story of a house, he's allowed to enter the lower story. The Gemara explains the source of these distinctions, which apply by particular laws of impurity, and as to what exactly is referenced by the term house in a house in regards to laws of sales. New Mishnah, somebody who vows to abstain from using a bed can still use a dargash, which is something similar to a bed. Others disagree, saying it would be forbidden to use. Someone who vows against using a dargash can still use a bed. The Gemara debates as to what exactly a dargash is. Some say it's a bed of fortune, which was a bed that some had the custom to designate for a guardian angel. Others disagree, describing it as a bed frame with leather tied within, which is described. Typically, a bed is meant to be overturned by a mourner, and it's held that by the leather mat bed, the holding straps can just be untied to fulfill this obligation. New Mishnah, somebody who vows against entering a city can enter the Tachum boundary, a concept from Tractate Nedarim, and he can enter its extension. Somebody who vows not to enter a house cannot enter from the doorframe inwards. The Gemara cites sources for these points. It debates whether by a vow against entering a house, you can still enter from the doorframe outward. New Mishnah, if somebody vows that fruits will be forbidden to him or upon his mouth or to his mouth, he can't benefit from things in exchange for them or from things grown from them. If he vowed against fruits in regards to his eating or in regards to his tasting, he can eat or taste things received in exchange for them and things that grow from them. This applies to the produce's seeds decompose. If they don't, he can't benefit from things grown from them. Another point, if somebody vowed to his wife against the work of her hands or vows them against his mouth, he's forbidden to benefit from things received in exchange for them or that grow from them. If he vowed that her work should be forbidden to him eating or to him tasting, he's allowed to benefit from things received in exchange for them and things that grow from them. This applies if the seeds of the produce decompose. If they don't, things that grow from them is forbidden. If somebody vows against eating from things his wife makes until Passover, or vows against wearing what she makes until Passover, then if she makes something before Passover, he can eat or wear it after Passover. If he vows against eating or wearing things she makes until Passover, if the thing is made before Passover, he can't eat or wear it after Passover. If somebody vows against his wife benefiting from him until Passover, so long as she goes to her father's house before the holiday of Sukkot, if she went before Passover, she can't benefit from him until Passover. If she went after Passover, she's violated the vow. If he said to his wife, vowing against her benefiting from him, if she went to her father's house before Passover. If she went before Passover, she can't benefit from him until the holiday of Sukkot. She can, however, go to her father's house after Passover. The Gemara discusses similar points. These are further qualified. It discusses various points on laws of produce in the sabbatical year. It also goes through points on truma tithes and similar. These are discussed further, and there are some additional points. And that's the end of chapter 7. Chapter 8 of Tractate Nedarim continues discussing the laws of vows. The first Mishnah says, if somebody vows against tasting wine today, he's forbidden to have wine until nightfall. If somebody vows against wine for this week, he's forbidden wine from then to the rest of the week, including Shabbos. If somebody vows against wine this month, he's forbidden wine during the rest of the month, excluding the next Rosh Chodesh. If somebody vows against wine this year, it includes the rest of the year, but not the next Rosh Chodesh. If somebody vows against wine during this 7-year cycle until the sabbatical year, he's forbidden it the rest of the years until and including the coming sabbatical year. If somebody vowed against wine for 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, or 1 7-year cycle, he's forbidden wine from that day until the day of the completion of this period. If somebody vows against wine until Passover, he's forbidden wine until Passover starts. If somebody vows against wine until it is Passover, he's forbidden wine until Passover ends. If somebody vows against wine until before Passover, it's debated whether or not this includes Passover. The Gemara says an opinion that regarding a vow against wine today, which ends at nightfall, he still needs to get the vow annulled at nightfall. This is because there's variation if he said the vow was for 1 day as opposed to today. So, to be safe, the vow must be annulled at nightfall. Such a mistake could be made from today to 1 day, but not vice versa. This is further discussed. It specifies that a vow for a week includes Shabbos, as you might have thought it's just weekdays. A vow against a month excludes even a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, meaning even the last day of a leap month is not included. If somebody vows against something for a day, it's debated if this is akin to a vow for 2 day or for 1 day. It's further debated from several sources. Further debate the remaining points. New Mishnah, if somebody vows against wine until the time of the grain reaping, until the grain harvest, or until the olive harvest, he can't drink wine until the start of that harvest. As a general rule, if somebody vows against something until a set time arrives, he can't do that thing until the set time starts. If he vows against the thing until it is the set time is included in this prohibition. If the specified event does not have a set time, whichever he said, the prohibition is only until the event arrives. For instance, if somebody made a vow until the fig harvest or until it is the fig harvest, the vow lasts until the fig harvest starts, meaning when people start gathering fruits in baskets. If the vow is said until the fig harvest passes, the fig harvest ends when the harvesters start folding up their knives. The Gemara says it's in reference to baskets of figs specifically, not baskets of grapes, as they're picked by hand. Others say it includes grapes as they're picked by hand once their stems dry. With the knives being put away, that's if most of the townspeople put away their knives. It discusses incidents of this harvest and mentions a story where the sage Rav Tarfon was eating figs after the harvest and somebody saw him and decided to shove him into a sack and toss him into a river. So Rav Tarfon said who he was, and the man realized it was a great sage and ran off. Then for the rest of his life, Rav Tarfon regretted this as he had felt he had used the Torah for his personal benefit, which is a very wrong thing to do. It says the man tried to drown the sage as there had been a person stealing his grapes and he thought it was the sage. Rav Tarfon thought he should have just paid the guy money instead of using his title. It cites many more points on the impermissibility of using Torah to benefit yourself, and there are further related points. New Mishnah, if somebody vowed against an item until the grain harvest, it's forbidden until most people start the wheat harvest, not the barley one, although it's really dependent on the regional dialect. If he made this vow on a mountain or a valley, it goes dependent on the harvest time of that mountain or valley. If somebody vowed against an item until the rains or until it is the rains, he's forbidden until the second rainfall. Others say it's until the time of the second rainfall, meaning even if the rain hasn't yet fallen. If he vowed against an item until the rain ceases, some say the item is forbidden until the month of Nisan ends, some say it's until Passover ends. The Gemara says, if somebody made a vow against something until the harvest while in Galilee, and then moved somewhere else, the timing is still dependent on Galilee. If somebody said specifically until the coming of the rain, everyone agrees that refers to the time of the rain. Others dispute this, although it's said that that was a true statement. However, people do dispute it if he said until the coming of the rains, plural. New Mishnah, if somebody vowed against tasting wine for the year, and it was announced to make the year a leap year, he's forbidden wine during the year and the extra month of the leap year. If somebody vowed against wine until the beginning of the Hebrew month of Adar, and it was a leap year which adds a second month of Adar, his vow lasts until the end of the first month. If his vow was until the end of Adar, it lasts until the end of the first Adar. The Gemara says this implies that this was said by the opinion that holds the word Adar refers to the first month. Others disagree and say that this was like the opinion that says typically by documents Adar refers to the second Adar, assuming you know it's a leap year. Our case refers to where he doesn't know the year was extended, so it refers to the first month. It brings sources. New Mishnah, if somebody vows that he won't taste wine until Passover, he can have wine on the first night of Passover if the guy intended to have his vow go until the time when everybody drinks wine. If someone vowed to not taste meat until the fast, his vow lasts until the night of the fast, as that's when people eat meat. If somebody vows against tasting garlic until Shabbos, he can't eat garlic until Friday night, as the intent was for it to be until people eat garlic. If somebody vows against benefiting from somebody, if they don't take from him for his son 1 kor of wheat and 2 barrels of wine, the vower can annul his vow without a sage, as the intent was to give the food to honor his friend, so he can refuse this gift to honor it further. If somebody vows against having his friend benefit from him unless he gives his son 1 kor of wheat and 2 barrels of wine, some say the vow prohibits the man from benefiting from him until he gives over the food. Others say the vower can annul it without a sage, saying he could just say it as if he received the gift he demanded. If somebody was being pressured to marry a woman and he vowed against benefiting from her forever, or if somebody divorced his wife and vowed against her benefiting from him, these women can still benefit from him, as he clearly meant marital benefit. If somebody was pressured into eating a meal with somebody and he vowed against entering his house or drinking a drop of cold water, he can still enter his house and drink his cold water, as his vow was only against eating or drinking by his friend in large quantities. And that's the end of chapter 8. Chapter 9 of Tractate Nedarim continues discussing the laws of vows, now on the topic of the nullification of vows. The first Mishnah says, some say we find an opening to annul a vow for the sake of honoring the man's parents. Others disagree, but they concede the point. Some say you can find an opening to annul a vow based on the honor of God. Others disagree, as then there would be no more vows. It's also disputed if you can find an opening to release a vow based on a new development. For instance, if somebody vowed against benefiting from somebody and that person becomes a Torah scholar or married off his son, or similar, and then the vower said he wouldn't have made the vow if this had been the case before, or if somebody vows against entering a house and then it becomes a synagogue and he said he wouldn't have made the vow if that was the case beforehand, so in all those cases it's disputed. The Gemara says, when it says a vow that couldn't be annulled because of God's honor would end up preventing vows, that means that no more vows could be annulled properly. Others disagree and say it means vows will no longer be annulled before sages. It's debated and says this latter concern doesn't apply by annulling vows due to the honor of your parents, as if people are typically annulling vows before sages, they'll do it there too anyways. It also cites the sources for the logics behind the dispute as to whether you can annul a vow based on new data. These are further discussed, and there are additional points on this new Mishnah. Some say, in regards to new developments, there are some occurrences which don't constitute as a new occurrence, and others disagree. For instance, if a man vows against marrying a woman as her father is wicked, and the father either dies or repents, or if he vows against entering a house as there is an evil dog within or a snake, and he's told the dog or snake died, these are like new developments, but also not, so it's disputed if this nullifies the vow. The Gemara says the father dying is actually a new development, so either the cases where the vow is dependent on the father's death, so it's just automatically annulled without there needing to be any new development. Others say that he was told that the father died before the oath was made. Others dispute this. New Mishnah. We also find an opening to annul vows based on the Torah, so we ask, would he have vowed if he knew the verses about not taking revenge, bearing a grudge, loving your fellow as yourself, etc., and the man says he wouldn't have made the vow if he knew this? In that case, the vow can be annulled. The Gemara discusses related points on charity. New Mishnah. We find an opening to annul a vow based on the obligation to pay a marriage contract. It gives an instance if a man vowed against benefiting from his wife, so he had to divorce her and realized he didn't have enough to pay the marriage contract, so he was asked if he would have made the vow if he had realized this, and the man said no. The vow can be annulled. The Gemara clarifies that this was dealing with land, not with movable items. It also says from this case that we do actually make an assessment to a debtor to leave him enough for his own basic requirements. It's just that the woman holds onto her kasuba until the husband gets more funds. New Mishnah. We find an opening to annul a vow based on Shabbos and holidays. Some said this would nullify the vows only on the Shabbos and holidays, but not on the rest of the year. But it was later instituted that if part of a vow is annulled, the whole vow is annulled. For instance, if somebody vowed not to benefit from a group of people and the vow is nullified with one of the individuals, it's nullified with all of them. A similar rule, if somebody vowed not to benefit from several people, one after the other, if the vow on the first person becomes nullified, all of them do. If the last one becomes nullified, just that one does. If the middle one becomes nullified, all the vows after him are nullified, but not the ones before. However, if he was specific with each individual, saying, I will not benefit from you, like an offering, and then to another, I will not benefit from you, like an offering, he must have both of these vows annulled separately. Another example, if somebody vowed against having wine for health reasons, and was then told that aged wine is good for you, he can now have aged wine, and therefore the whole vow against wine is annulled. It gives further instances of this concept. The Gemara says the source for this opinion, and also for that aged wine and the other examples it brought that have health benefits. New Mishnah. An opening to annul a vow can be made for the sake of the man's own honor or for the honor of his children. It gives an instance if somebody made a vow and had to divorce his wife and it ended up causing a bad name for him or for his children, the vow can be annulled. A vow can also be nullified, for instance, if somebody vows to not marry somebody for a specific reason, like that they look a certain way, and it turns out that it's just not true. The vow is annulled as it was mistaken from the outset. It gives an instance of somebody who vowed against marrying a woman, but then they spent some time making the woman prettier, and the man was then willing to marry her, and so the vow was annulled. It also said some verses that the daughters of Israel are beautiful, but poverty has taken this away. The Gemara gives further instances of similar cases. It says many related points on such issues occurring in regards to vows and their later modification and similar. And that's the end of chapter 9. Chapter 10 of Tractate Nedarim continues discussing the laws of vows and their nullification. The first Mishnah says, by a betrothed young woman, her father and husband together nullify her vows. If only one of them nullified the vow, it's not sufficient, and obviously goes into effect if one of them certified the vow. The Gemara clarifies these points, saying, both are required to nullify the vow, and if one nullified it and another certified it, and then the one who certified it removed his certification, it's insufficient, and he also needs to properly nullify it. It cites sources for the further points. These sources and the related verses are further discussed. Others dispute the source and cite another one. Another question, if just one of the two, the husband, nullifies the vow but not the father, does this make no change to the vow or does it weaken it? This has practical ramifications in regards to the punishment for its violation. It cites related lengthy sources to prove this point. It comes out from this that it's a dispute between Beis Shammai, who says he just cuts his half of the vow out, and Beis Hillel, who says it weakens the entire vow. If other asks, if you're able to dissolve the certification of your wife's vow so you can nullify it, and also can you remove the nullification in such a vow so that you can certify it? Some rule that a certification can be dissolved, but not a nullification. Another point, if somebody certified a vow twice and then had the first certification nullified, similar to an oath, the second certification still stands. It's also asked, what if somebody certified a vow and then nullified it and said the certification will only take effect if the nullification takes effect? Based on a similar point by animal offering pledges, it says that you can both certify and nullify a vow and have the second part, the nullification, take effect. It does, however, say that you cannot certify and nullify a vow at the same time, as they can't typically be done sequentially anyways. It's similar debate the validity of saying your vow is certified for you today. It's further discussed. New Mishnah, if the father of a betrothed young woman dies, his authority does not transfer to the husband. If the husband dies, his authority does transfer to the father, so here the father has more power. The husband has more power, as in the woman's adulthood once they fully marry then. The father has no authority, the heir, while the husband fully gets to nullify the vows. The Gemara cites verses as sources for these points. The verses are discussed, and it also says the case where the husband has full jurisdiction over the vow nullification is where the betrothal also happened when she was an adult. This would make it somewhat redundant to a different source, though, so some posit this is actually the source of the law. Some say it's just repeating the latter clause as it cited the first clause. New Mishnah, if somebody took a vow when betrothed and was immediately divorced the same day and then re-betrothed to somebody else, and this could happen repeatedly, her father and her last husband nullify the vows. Generally, any young woman who hasn't yet entered her own legal jurisdiction can have her vows nullified by her father and her last betrothed husband. The Gemara cites verses as a source for these points. These opinions are discussed. It asks, is a husband's divorce considered like nothing or like the certification of a vow? There's a practical difference if a man divorced his wife and then remarried her as to whether he can now nullify the vow. It debates this point from several different sources, but it remains unresolved. New Mishnah. It was generally a practice to make sure a woman had no standing vows when she went into marriage. So when a woman was about to be married, the father would nullify any and all of her vows, and the husband would do the same during the betrothal. This is necessary to do then, as once they marry, he can't nullify her vows she had made prior to the marriage. The Gemara debates based off this whether a husband can nullify vows of his wife that he's never heard. It's debated from a number of related cases. It's left unresolved. It also asks if a deaf person can nullify his wife's vows. It brings a source which shows that he cannot. It also asks if a husband can nullify the vows of two of his wives simultaneously. Based on a verse in regards to the Sota offering, it implies that it's not allowed. New Mishnah, the typical maximum time from betrothal to marriage was 12 months, and for a widow marrying, it was 30 days. Some say if this time passes, as the husband is now obligated to support the betrothed woman with sustenance, he would also be able to nullify her oaths. Others disagree. The Gemara cites a similar case regarding the levirate marriage. They try to figure out what we hold, like it's debated. New Mishnah. A woman pending a levirate marriage, the brother-in-law, even if there are multiple, can nullify her vows during this period. Some say this is only if there's one pending yibum brother. Others say it's not allowed at all, as either there are multiple people doing yibum, so nobody has sole authority, or one person does, but they're just not married yet, so he just has no jurisdiction. The Gemara explains the logic of the last opinion, that they actually either hold that there is no Zika bond, there's no actual legal connection between a widow and her brother-in-law by Yibum. The others would either disagree or say that there was a levirate betrothal, which does affect a levirate bond. The legitimacy of these points are further debated. This is further discussed. New Mishnah. If a husband says to his wife, "Until I arrive, any vow you make is certified," this is invalid. It's debated if he can do this by nullification. Some say yes, as he can nullify vows that have taken effect. He can nullify these. Others say no, as based on a verse, it implies a person can only nullify a vow if he's able to certify that vow. The Gemara says, according to the opinion that you can establish a blanket period of vow nullification for a wife, do these vows take effect for one instant and then immediately get nullified, or do they just not take effect at all? This has practical relevance if somebody hearing the vow said he wants to partake in the vow, meaning if it was valid for just one moment, his vow would take effect, but if it never took effect, neither would the other guys. It debates this question from several sources. It questions it even further, and it derives from a point on ritual impurity laws that he would seemingly hold that the vow doesn't even take effect at all. The opposing opinion would still disagree, again, based on their verse. New Mishnah. The nullification of a vow can be done all day that the vow was taken. This could result in a leniency. For instance, if somebody took a vow Friday night, they'd be able to have it annulled all the way up to Shabbos night, and it can also create a stringency. If somebody took a vow right before nightfall, they have until nightfall to annul the vow. The Gemara says some say the vow can be annulled for the rest of the day. Others hold it can be annulled within a 24-hour period after it's said. They cite verses and debate them. It also cites a later source which allows nullifying vows on Shabbos, but it asks, can you nullify vows related to Shabbos on Shabbos, or even all vows? It's said that according to the opinion that vow nullification can be for the rest of the day on Shabbos, you can nullify any vow, as that would be your only opportunity to do so. According to the opinion that it's within 24 hours after, you can only nullify Shabbos-related vows, as other vows can just be nullified after Shabbos. In regards to asking an authority to dissolve your vow on Shabbos, it's questioned if this is permissible if you had time to do it before Shabbos started. Some say yes, some say only with a single expert, not with a panel of three, which resembles a court, which isn't allowed to convene on Shabbos. Others disagree, saying 3 men annulling a vow does not resemble a court, so it would be allowed on Shabbos. It's also said that you can request a vow nullification even at nightfall. It's discussed as to who agrees with this. Some even say that a vow can be requested to be nullified when the judge is standing or alone at night on Shabbos by his relatives, and even when it was possible for the vow to have been nullified before Shabbos. The sage Rabban Gamliel would not stand when nullifying vows, but that's because he held differently than this opinion that the nullification of a vow requires that it be from a level of regret, so he had to sit to examine the case. In fact, further based on the verse, taking vows is generally considered such an improper thing to do. It's considered to be like a sin, even if you end up fulfilling it. If somebody tries to annul a vow with some vague wording, like, I do not want you to vow, or this is not a vow, that's not valid to nullify a vow. If somebody instead said, you have done well, or I would have taken that vow myself, or something similar, that's a valid certification for the vow. By nullifying a wife's vow on Shabbos, it says you shouldn't just verbally nullify it, you should actually have the person violate the vow and then mentally nullify it. Some say it also works to mentally nullify a vow the rest of the week. A husband cannot nullify his wife's vow with the terminology of a court's nullification, and the same applies vice versa. It cites verses and further discussion of these points. It's also said that if a husband refuses to nullify his wife's vow to annoy her, he's still allowed to nullify it days later. It's further discussed, and it says that silence by mistake is considered like silence to annoy by these laws. And that's the end of chapter 10. Chapter 11, the final chapter of Tractate Nedarim, finishes some final laws on vows and their nullification. The first mission says the vows that a husband or father can nullify are vows of affliction, for instance, a vow against bathing or against adorning herself. Others say that doesn't constitute a vow of affliction. A vow of affliction would be a vow against all the produce in the world, and would not include a vow against produce from a single country or shopkeeper, for instance. However, if the shopkeeper is the only person she can get the produce from, that is a vow he can nullify. The Gemara says a husband can also nullify vows that affect his relationship with his wife, along with vows of affliction. The difference is that nullifying vows of affliction is permanent, while nullifying vows involving the relationship, the nullification only lasts as long as the marriage does. However, a different source seems to say that even vows of the relationship, if nullified, they're nullified permanently, so it says actually yes, that is the case. However, the vows in the relationship can be permanently nullified to the current husband, but not to her future husbands, unlike vows of affliction, which can be permanently nullified for everybody. It explains the debate on vows against bathing. The opinions that say this is a vow of affliction say she's vowed against the benefit of bathing, which means she can't bathe, and also will now cause physical issues since she can't. The opinion that says this is not a vow of affliction says that this is a reference to not bathing for one day, and there's no concern of physical issues for not bathing for one day. Some say it's that this opinion would say that she made a vow and an oath combined to not bathe, and explains that this could work with the wording, as sometimes an oath is referred to as a vow. A different source, that the latter opinion, that not bathing for a period isn't a serious affliction, would actually say that not doing laundry is a severe affliction, and I cite sources. There's further discussion on these points. It also debates, according to this latter opinion, that those vows aren't vows of affliction. However, they could be a vow affecting the relationship between husband and wife, which can be nullified. It's debated if this is the case. It further discusses particular vows that constitute ones which would affect the relationship between husband and wife. These are discussed further. There are additional specific cases brought. It says if a woman vows against eating 2 loaves, one of which, if not eaten, will cause her to deprive herself, and the other one will not, there's debate if the husband can nullify just the vow against the first loaf, or even both of them. It also discusses the nullification of vows on her taking a Nazirite vow. This is further discussed. New Mishnah. If a woman vowed against benefiting from the property of other people, her husband can't nullify this vow, although if she's poor, she can still benefit from the field charity obligations. If a person vowed against letting Levium or Kohanim benefiting from him, they can still take the tithes from him against his will. If he vowed against specific Kohanim or Levium from benefiting from him, he can still give it to others. The Gemara debates, in the first vow, if the husband is included in her vow against benefiting from people, from several opinions. This is further discussed, and it also is debated if such a poor woman, in addition to the field charities, can benefit from the poor man's tithe, which is Meiser Ani. It's debated along with the remaining points. It's also questioned as to how the Kohanim and Levium can eat the tithes that they took from somebody that vowed against giving the tithes to them. Some say that the tithes are considered ownerless to everybody, as he can't use them, so therefore the Kohanim could just now take them. New Mishnah. If a woman vows against producing things for her father, brother, or brother-in-law, the husband can't nullify them, as they don't affect the relationship. If the wife vows against producing things for her husband, this is automatically void, as she is obligated to help her husband, although some say he should still nullify the vow in case she helps him more than her required minimum, which would be in violation of this vow. Others say he should nullify the vow, as if they divorce, the vow will take effect, and they won't be able to remarry. The Gemara says some hold like this last opinion, and it debates based off this if you can vow against an entity that doesn't yet exist based on comparison to similar cases. It's debated further. Some say the issue is with such vows against prohibition. They have a stricter status and cannot be permitted, and this prohibits the husband from taking the produce as is. There's also the issue of them divorcing and being unable to marry. New Mishnah. If the husband mixed up the vow nullification, meaning if the wife took it and he thought his daughter took it, or vice versa, or she took a Nazirite vow and he thought she took a vow to bring an offering, or vice versa, or she took a vow against grapes and he thought it was against figs, or vice versa, he needs to redo the vow nullification. The Gemara discusses sources for these points. It additionally states, as a general rule for the retraction of speech, a person can legally retract a statement if he does so within the period of time it would take to speak a short phrase. This applies basically by all laws. The only exceptions that you can't retract the statements, even if immediately after, are if somebody blasphemes, or if they worship idols, or betroths, or divorces a wife. New Mishnah. If a woman vows against figs and grapes, if the husband certifies the part on figs, both are certified. If he nullifies the part on figs, it only is nullified if he also nullifies grapes. If the woman vowed against tasting grapes and against tasting figs, that's considered to be 2 separate vows. The Gemara cites sources. These are discussed further. New Mishnah. Somebody didn't nullify his wife's vows on the day she took it, and later found out that he was allowed to nullify her vows. He can nullify it on the day that he found that he was allowed to. If he knew that, but he didn't realize she had taken the vow, it's debated if he can nullify it. The Gemara cites some related disputes on lacking information in regards to certain prohibitions. New Mishnah. If somebody vows against benefiting from his son-in-law, he's allowed to give his daughter money as a gift, as long as her husband has no rights to it, and it includes whatever she picks up and puts in her mouth. The Gemara debates by these laws if the hand of a woman is legally considered to be the same as the hand of her husband from several sources, including by the laws of an Erev. No Mishnah. If a widowed or divorced woman takes a vow, such as a Nazirite vow, if she remarries right after, even within 30 days, her new husband cannot annul the vow. If a married woman took a Nazirite vow to last for 30 days, and her husband nullifies it and then dies or divorces her, the vow is still nullified after. If she took the vow, divorced on the same day, and then immediately remarried, he cannot nullify the vow. Generally, if she was under her own jurisdiction with the vow for any period of time, he can no longer nullify it. The Gemara cites sources and discusses these points. New Mishnah. There are 9 possible young women whose vows cannot be nullified. If she's an orphan grown woman, if an orphan took the vow as a young woman and then became an adult, if she's an orphan who took a vow as a young woman and still is a young woman, if she took her vow as an adult and her father died, if she took the vow as a young woman, became an adult, and then her father died, if she took the vow as a young woman and her father died, if she took the vow as a young woman, her father died, and then she became an adult, if she took the vow as an adult and her father is alive, and if she took the vow as a young woman, became an adult, and her father is still alive. Some say in the event that a father betrothed his minor daughter to somebody to be married later, and she's widowed or divorced during that period, returning to the father, he can no longer annul her vows. The Gemara discusses the author of this. New Mishnah. If a woman vowed against having benefit from her father or father-in-law, if she prepares anything for her husband, or vowed against benefiting from her husband, if she prepares anything for her father or father-in-law, the husband can nullify this vow. The Gemara discusses additional such vows that the husband can nullify for his wife. There are some particular instances they're discussed further. New Mishnah. Originally, it was instituted that 3 types of women would automatically be divorced and collect their marriage contracts. The wife of a Kohen who says she is impure to him, meaning that she was violated by somebody else, a woman who claims her husband is impotent, or a woman who vows against having intimacy with any other Jewish person. It was later changed to make it so that if a woman wanted to remarry, they couldn't just do one of these things. So the first case requires proof, the second must request her divorce, and the third just has her vow annulled in that she can still be with him, but no other Jewish person besides for him. The Gemara debates, if a woman who is married to a Kohen who claims she was violated, whether or not she's still allowed to eat teruma. There's an issue of it casting doubts on the legitimacy of her children, so some say it's only forbidden if she becomes widowed. It also debates if she was violated, whether she received her marriage contract, as she can no longer be with her Kohen husband, but she could legally remain with him if he was anyone but a Kohen. It cites similar discussions and says she does receive her marriage contract. It also debates if a woman claims to her husband that he had divorced her, whether there's legitimacy to this claim. It's largely based on if we think a person would be brazen enough to claim such a thing lying. It tries to bring a proof from the case of our Mishnah, where a woman claims of her husband's physical impotence, but that's not a valid proof, as a husband could be unaware of that. Well, he would definitely be aware if he had divorced her, so he would actually believe a woman who claims she was divorced. It says a particular incident of a woman who acted as if she had just cohabited, but her husband told her that they hadn't, so she said it might have accidentally been with a non-Jewish merchant there, so it was brought to court, and it was ruled that they could stay married, as she could have been lying to try and get divorced to marry somebody else. It says some similar cases. There was also a case where an adulterer went into a woman's house and the husband walked in, so the adulterer hid and saw a snake bite into a vegetable, and then the husband went to eat the vegetable, so the adulterer jumped out and stopped the husband from eating it, saving his life. It was brought to court and ruled that the adulterer hadn't actually cohabited with the woman, as then he would have just let the husband die. This is based off the verse, for they have committed adultery and blood is on their hands. This is brought to remove the presumption that they could have actually been adulterous, and the adulterer saved the husband's life anyways. And that's the end of chapter 11 and the entire Tractate Nedarim. Alright, that was a lot of information, so here's a rough summary of a lot of the practical takeaways of the tractate. Vows can be taken for whatever reason to do or not do something, and must be followed. It's a severe prohibition to violate a vow, a neder, and it's a complex process to have it annulled, so as a general rule, it's simply said to be preferable to never take a vow. And that's about everything. Thank you so much for watching.